Welcome to NIT International. We are here once again to provide you with the latest news. Ukrainian forces targeted Crimea, destroying a Russian air defense radar. Russia annexed Crimea in 2014. With Trump pulling support, the situation is harder, but European countries continue to support Ukraine. Let's get into the details. The Ukrainian forces have conducted yet another air operation on the Crimean territories, which have been under occupation since 2014. This airstrike, targeting the Crimean peninsula occupied by the Russian army, resulted in the destruction of a Russian air defense radar station. As alarm sirens echoed throughout Crimea, Russian President Vladimir Putin was left in disarray. Under the orders of Russian President Vladimir Putin, the Crimean territories, which were invaded in February 2014, remain under Russian control. Following the Euromaidan protests that began in Ukraine in November 2013, the pro-Russian President Viktor Yanukovych was overthrown, and a new pro-Western Ukrainian government was established. Ukraine began forging closer ties with the European Union and NATO, which Russia perceived as a significant threat. In response, Russia took action. Sevastopol, the primary base of Russia's Black Sea Fleet, holds immense strategic importance. In order to maintain its military presence in the region and secure dominance over the Black Sea, Russia decided to invade Crimea. It has been claimed that more than 60% of Crimea's population is of ethnic Russian origin. Exploiting this situation, Russia launched an attack under the pretext of protecting Russians in Crimea and deployed its troops to the region. At the time, the Kremlin stated that the majority of Crimean residents supported the annexation of Crimea to Russia. Consequently, in 2014, the Russian army occupied Crimea. In that same year, Russia deployed its so-called Green Men, unidentified uniformed soldiers, to Crimean territories. By March, Russian forces had seized control of Ukrainian military bases in Crimea. On March 16, 2014, Russia conducted an illegal referendum and declared the annexation of Crimea. In this unlawful vote, it was claimed that 97% of voters supported joining Russia. As a result, on March 18, 2014, Russia officially annexed Crimea. However, this annexation was merely the beginning of the war between Russia and Ukraine. Russian President Vladimir Putin has since transformed Crimea into a military stronghold. This allowed the Russian army to launch attacks on Ukrainian territory from Crimea when the full-scale invasion began on February 24, 2022. Russia's annexation of Crimea has been deemed a violation of international law, yet the region remains under Russian control. The United States, the European Union, and NATO countries refused to recognize the annexation and imposed economic sanctions on Russia. Nevertheless, Vladimir Putin has refused to relinquish Crimea and has declared it a permanent part of Russian territory. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, however, vowed in the early months of the war that Crimea would be reclaimed. He reiterated that once the war in Ukraine's mainland concludes, the next step will be the liberation of Crimea. However, considering the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine, this remains a formidable challenge. The situation has become even more complex following US President Donald Trump's decision to withdraw support for Ukraine, leaving the country to face this war alone. Trump has suggested that Ukraine must accept Russia's demands in order to end the war, but Ukraine has demonstrated that it has no intention of surrendering. In response to recent developments, the Ukrainian army delivered a powerful message to Russia. In a newly launched air operation, Ukrainian forces successfully destroyed a Russian air defense radar station located within the borders of Crimea. According to RBC Ukraine, the Ukrainian army targeted a Russian air defense radar station in temporarily occupied Crimea using unmanned aerial vehicles. This airstrike specifically hit the territory of a mobile outpost near the village of Oleniuka in the Tarhankut Cape region, which belonged to the Russian Armed Forces 31st Air Defense Division. According to the pro-Russian Astra Telegram channel, the radar station at the mobile outpost sustained significant damage following the attack. Astra reported, as a result, a mobile radar station was damaged. There were no casualties. It is worth noting that only a few days prior, the Ukrainian army had carried out another attack on Crimean territories. On the night of February 26th, Ukrainian forces launched a large-scale air assault on Russian-occupied Crimea and the Krasnodar Krai. According to the Ukrainian General Staff, the operation targeted military bases, logistical centers, and energy facilities. In particular, Ukrainian forces struck the Saki and Kacha military airfields in Crimea, key bases used by Russia to control the Black Sea airspace and conduct attacks on Ukraine. Additionally, the Tuapse refinery, which processes 12 million tons of oil annually, was also targeted. Ukrainian sources reported that more than 40 explosions occurred near the refinery, causing extensive damage to its infrastructure. However, the Kyiv Independent stated that it could not independently verify these claims. In response, the Russian Ministry of Defense claimed that it had retaliated, announcing the destruction of 128 Ukrainian drones. According to Russian reports, 83 drones were downed over Krasnodar Krai, 30 over Crimea, and several others over the Azov Sea, the Black Sea, as well as in the Bryansk and Kursk regions. Nevertheless, the Ukrainian army has emphasized that it will continue to target Russian military and strategic assets. Recently, Ukraine has intensified its attacks on Russian military and energy facilities using domestically produced unmanned aerial vehicles. These strikes are part of Ukraine's strategy to undermine Russia's war efforts by targeting its fossil fuel infrastructure, which plays a critical role in financing the war. The damage inflicted on Russian oil depots demonstrates Ukraine's unwavering determination in executing this strategy. As the war between Russia and Ukraine rages on, the recent dispute between Zelensky and Trump has dominated global headlines. Following reports that US President Donald Trump expelled Zelensky from the White House, European leaders rushed to express their support for Ukraine. Italy has decided to provide $13 million in aid to assist in the restoration of Ukraine's energy infrastructure. According to Ukraine's Ministry of Energy, Italy signed an agreement with Kyiv on February 28th to direct this financial assistance to Ukraine's Energy Support Fund. The ministry further stated that these funds would be used to revitalize Ukraine's energy sector. Russia continues to relentlessly target Ukraine's energy infrastructure. Ukrainian Deputy Minister of Energy Roman Andarek remarked, "This aid will enable us to procure the necessary equipment and enhance the resilience of Ukraine's energy system at a time when the enemy is mercilessly attacking our energy facilities." Meanwhile, in response to the public dispute between Trump and Zelensky, Ukrainians and international donors contributed more than $649,000 to a newly launched fundraising campaign, humorously titled, "For Nuclear Weapons." According to the Kyiv Independent, the phrase "nuclear weapons" was a satirical reference to President Zelensky's previous statement that if Ukraine were denied NATO membership, the United States should provide Ukraine with an alternative security guarantee, akin to nuclear deterrence. The world continues to wonder when the war between Russia and Ukraine will come to an end. Before taking office, US President Donald Trump claimed he could end the war in 24 hours. However, after assuming office, he has abandoned Ukraine and instead sought closer relations with Russia. Trump believes that diplomacy is the only solution and has proposed a peace agreement between Ukraine and Russia. However, it is said that this agreement would require Ukraine to cede its occupied territories to Russia. Additionally, Trump reportedly pressured Zelensky to sign another agreement that would have transferred 50% of Ukraine's natural resources to the US. Eventually, this proposal was modified, stipulating that 50% of the revenue generated from these resources would be allocated to a specific fund in the coming years. At present, Ukraine finds itself cornered by both the US and Russia. Meanwhile, European leaders continue to send messages of support to President Zelensky, reaffirming their commitment to assisting Ukraine in ending the occupation of its territories. Europe remains steadfast in its support for Ukraine's sovereignty and independence. A critical move has come from Syria. With this move, Russia has lost almost everything in Syria. Things have become completely complicated for Putin, who has completely lost his sphere of dominance in the Middle East. Putin, who is still trying to keep troops in Syria, unintentionally made a very big mistake, and in almost every area things have turned in favor of the Ukrainian army. During the recent Ukrainian-Russian war, the Russian army began to experience quite big problems. At this point, Russia, which started sending more troops, ammunition, and weapons to the battlefield, lost the regions it supported in many ways. The fact that the Russian Federation supports many countries as a legacy of the Soviets has dragged things towards a completely different process. Ukraine's complete suppression of the Russian military on a regional scale has paved the way for more resources to be sent to this region. This meant the destruction of the dictator Assad, who stood in Syria thanks to Putin's support. The interim government established in Syria, on the other hand, has proceeded to a very aggressive process regarding the policies pursued against Russia. Russia has taken a huge blow from the country that it supports and allocates resources to the most. For Putin, the fact that the change of administration was so clear meant both a major disruption of trade in the Middle East and an opening of war to the authoritarian attitude that Russia has basically established in foreign policy. Therefore, Putin, who wants Russia's position in Syria to continue in a similar way, has made a very big mistake, and things have progressed as he never expected. The Ministry of Defense of the Syrian interim government has dealt a major blow to Russia's presence at the Tartus naval base with its latest move. According to a report by Turkish media outlet TRT, a missile-laden 30-car convoy departing from the Hamamim airbase in Latakia province was stopped at a checkpoint in Tartus. The Russians had to return to the Hamamim base at around 1700 hours, immediately after waiting at this checkpoint for about 8 hours. At this point, regarding the incident, after the recent statement of the Syrian Transitional Government's defense minister, Murhaf Abu Khazra, that the protection of Russian military bases will depend on the benefits it will provide to Syria. If we are going to benefit from this for Syria, yes, said. It should be noted that Russia has been using the Hamamim airbase since August 2015. Last month, the port of Tartus was evacuated due to the regime change. While the photos clearly show the goods and equipment loaded on the cargo ships Syrian Express, Sparta, and Sparta II, belonging to the Russian Oberon Logistica company, the new Syrian government has also completely terminated the investment agreement with a Russian company for the management of the port of Tartus, Russia's only foreign naval base. This has paved the way for the further growth of all kinds of problems of Russia in the region now. The most important reason for this was that Russia constantly fed the dictatorial side in the struggle. Putin has been cited as the main reason why the regime has endured so much. This has also been recorded as the main explanation for why the new administration has taken an aggressive attitude. At this point, the statement made by British intelligence is of great importance, because Russia's presence in Syria is facing a great threat. According to a report by Reuters, the British Ministry of Defense has detected 6 Russian ships crossing the English Channel in a short period of time. This is the announcement that Russian combat and merchant ships observed by the British Army, the Royal Navy, and the Royal Air Force have left Syria. At this point, the ministry stated that Russia had evacuated its military resources in Syria after the overthrow of Assad, and this had dealt a blow to Moscow's ambitions in the Middle East. British Defense Secretary John Healey said, "These ships left Syria after Putin abandoned his ally Assad, but they were still armed and full of ammunition. This shows that Russia is weakening but remains a threat," said. The British Ministry of Defense has shown that the main reason for this withdrawal of ammunition is the defeat in Ukraine. After the incident, Russia started looking for a different port. Immediately after contacting the Sudanese government, Putin received an unexpected response. The Sudanese government, which stated that there are no obstacles to the ratification of the agreement on the establishment of a naval base on the Red Sea coast with the Russian Federation, caused great repercussions all over the world. According to a report by the BBC, the negotiations at the base were conducted during the reign of former President Omar al-Bashir. Despite the overthrow of Bashir, the Sudanese military government has expressed that there are no problems in these negotiations. Sudan and Russia have reached an agreement on the issue of the Russian naval base. Sudanese Foreign Minister Ali Yusuf said at a press conference with his Russian counterpart Sergei Lavrov in Moscow on Wednesday. It is known that the possibility of losing Russia's main naval base in Tartus in Syria in this area threatens the existence of the Russian military presence in Africa. It could also lead to Moscow losing its ability to exert influence in the strategically important Mediterranean, Middle East, and Red Sea regions. But despite this, many soldiers stationed in Syria are still being kept in the region by Putin. The most important reason for this is that there is not enough transparent information about the agreements in Sudan, and the possible construction of a port will clearly hinder Russia's mobility. It is known that Russian officials are planning to maintain a limited military presence in Syria precisely for this reason. It is thought that the Kremlin wants to maintain its dominance on a regional scale, aiming to counter the resurgence of the influence of Islamic State militants in the country. According to Bloomberg and a report by the Institute for the Study of War, ISW, this plan has quite a lot of uncertainty. According to sources quoted by Bloomberg, Moscow is moving to sign an agreement with the new government in Syria that will allow it to keep a certain number of personnel and military equipment in the country. According to one of the sources, Russia hopes to protect the naval and air bases it used in Syria before the current president Ahmed al-Shara, who led the rebel offensive that overthrew Bashar al-Assad in December last year. Bloomberg, on the other hand, thinks differently about this. He stated that Russia has no guarantees that these negotiations will result in a signed agreement. Nevertheless, at this point, the first telephone conversation between Putin and the new Syrian president, which took place on December 12th, shows that the probability of such an outcome is not very small. A finalized agreement could be the basis for Russia's second major foreign policy success this month, just after the United States announced that it would begin peace talks with Moscow on how to end the war in Ukraine. It is also a sign that Moscow is mending relations with Syria's new rulers, that no one has a problem with Assad living in Moscow. Bloomberg reported, many European officials wanted Russian forces to leave Syria, but others, especially those from southern Europe, worry that Russia could refocus on Libya if it loses its naval and air bases in Syria. These two military facilities have enabled Russia to project its influence in Africa and in the Middle East, and losing them would be a significant setback for the Kremlin, said. According to Bloomberg, after the overthrow of the Assad regime, Turkey, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia strengthened their relations with Syria, as well as almost completely broke the influence of Russia and Iran. Bloomberg reported, last week Putin said during their talks that he was ready to provide al-Shara with aid and basic trade support to support the fragmented Syrian economy. Days later, the Syrian central bank sent fresh local banknotes from Russia to relieve the cash shortage, said. This change of administration in Syria may enable Ukraine to take a superior position on a regional scale. This, in turn, can prepare the ground for the gradual resolution of many basic concerns and the revelation of new positions in Russia. It is stated that if such an advantage is obtained, Ukraine has a basic dynamic that can take quite big steps. In addition, it is clearly reported that at a time when peace talks are so close, Russia can now face much more important problems, and these problems are too to overcome over time. The defeat in the war in Ukraine and the taking of such hard blows in foreign policy indicate that one of the most important problems in the region will be exposed again. While this shows that Ukraine is now at its most advantageous period against Russia, it also underlines that a rather complicated process may be starting for Putin. And at this point, it's only a matter of time before the events that will be called the real turning point for Putin develop. A critical move has come from the Ukrainian army. The Nemesis regiment has detonated the most critical weapon belonging to North Korea. With that, everything has completely changed. Thanks to this, many question marks about North Korea's support for Russia have also disappeared. The data that has just come out about the possible attacks on the region and the fight in Kursk, which will start, has had a big impact all over the world. In the last days of the Ukrainian war, the Russian army entered into a difficult position against Ukraine in many respects. As a result of this, some Eastern Bloc countries, which want to cut off the advantages of the Ukrainian army in the region, have mobilized all the means at their disposal to help Russia. As this brought with it a Cold War-like tension experienced before, it began to give the impression that the world was dividing into two poles again for the first time in a long time. A large number of countries have started to do their best to prevent this kind of structure from turning into a much more tense and bilateral conflict in the coming processes. But despite this, the basic dynamics in the Russian army have moved towards an unexpected phase. The most important country that has given so much support has been recorded as North Korea. The direct support of the Russian army's policies towards Ukraine, and even the sending of troops to the region, has greatly increased the tension. That's exactly at this point everything changed. And Ukraine has taken a very big step. The pilots of the 412th Nemesis Regiment, attached to the Unmanned Systems Forces, have long had the power to take significant steps against the Russian army. The fact that the Nemesis Regiment had such a large force prepared the ground for it to be treated as both an experienced and qualified unit. At this point, while there are still some question marks about North Korea's support, entering into a conflict with a North Korean-made 170mm M1989 Coxswain arson-powered artillery system for the first time completely changed things. The Russian army, which is known to be in a deficient process in terms of weapons and vehicles, has confirmed this deficiency with this support. The regiment's press service posted the video on Telegram. The system was reportedly destroyed by a night bomber in the Luhansk region, marking the first recorded case of destruction of this type of self-propelled artillery systems during the Russo-Ukrainian War. The passage of North Korean M1989s through Russia had been recorded at this point, but despite this, how much they were involved in direct clashes with Ukraine was a big question mark. In January 2025, it was reported that these troops were made available for the first time at the disposal of Russian artillery. The importance of this weapon was completely different. The M1989 Coxswain is known to be a 40-ton North Korean-made self-propelled artillery system that was first seen at a parade in the city of Coxswain in 1989. In addition, the weapon uses a rare 170mm caliber, and its long-barreled cannon is stated to provide a significant range. According to current data, the range of conventional bullets is 40 kilometers, and when active-reactive ammunition is used, it can reach up to 60 kilometers. It is probably thought that the firing rate is regulated, so that there will be 1 to 2 shots every 5 minutes. Another importance of the Coxswain is that it is significantly superior to all the barreled cannons that Russia is currently using at the front. In addition, it should be noted that these weapons have such a powerful range when active-reactive bullets are used, as the only artillery system that can match it is the Soviet-made 203mm powered Tu-S7 Pion. Immediately after this incident, a statement from the South Korean Defense Ministry gave very critical information about North Korea's support for Russia back-to-back, and in an instant, everything has completely changed. In a statement issued by the South Korean Defense Ministry, it was reported that North Korea has transferred about 200 long-range artillery units and reinforcement troops to Russia. According to information provided by the South Korean Yonhap news agency, the briefing given to the country's Parliamentary Defense Committee was received from the source. The Ministry of Defense estimates that North Korea has provided about 11,000 troops, ballistic missiles, 200 long-range cannons, and a significant amount of ammunition to support the Russian intervention, while it is stated that this is very critical for Russia to hold on in the region. The Ministry of Defense said, "There is a possibility that the support of troops, weapons, and ammunition will be further increased in the future," said. While it is known that only North Korean-made M1989 Coxswain long-range howitzers have been delivered so far, it is not yet known exactly what support has been provided in terms of weapons other than this. It was recorded that these were transported to Russia by rail in December. In the video posted by a Russian soldier, a Korean arson motorized artillery system is clearly visible deployed in a camouflaged firing position. The reason for the support given to Russia in this area has also been revealed by South Korean intelligence, and in an instant, the deceptive bargain between the Russian army and North Korea has also been found out. The South Korean ministry expects that this year, the DPRK will almost double its development of many sophisticated weapons, such as nuclear submarines, reconnaissance satellites, and solid-fuel intercontinental ballistic missiles. The technological assistance received from Russia is cited as the main reason for these rapid development moves. At this point, the Japanese edition of NHK World Japan recently stated, based on sources close to Russia-North Korea relations, that Russia is clearly helping to develop various types of unmanned aerial vehicles. It is expected that such technology transfers will drag the region towards a completely mixed process later this year. In response to the development of the UAV, Russia is believed to be a response to North Korea's deployment of military units to the Kursk region, as well as its participation in the conflicts waged against the Ukrainian Defense Forces. This can also be cited as an example of the increasing difficulties of the Russian army. The part about why the Russian army, which is in a position where it needs different countries, needs this, can be clearly seen in the next operation. The 148th Ukrainian Air Assault Force. The separate artillery brigade was mobilized to take very important steps against the Russian army. The Ukrainian army, which shot down 2 Russian howitzers and a tank belonging to the Russian army with artillery fire, posted a video of its work on the official Telegram page of the Air Assault Forces. 148. The enemy army, which opened fire on the Ukrainian positions from the artillery in the area where the brigade's M777 howitzers were located, encountered a very big surprise at this point. Immediately after making the adjustment from a drone, the Ukrainian army opened counter-battery fire. Besides, at its first target, the Ukrainian army saw a Russian D-20 howitzer, which was detected from the rising dust after the shots were fired. The paratroopers who came to the area after this focused their fire directly on him. While the enemy found the howitzer in an unprepared position and near the houses, there was ammunition and gunpowder next to it, which caught fire as a result of accurate artillery shots. While the artillery fire was damaging the cannon itself, Ukrainian gunners immediately behind it also began to open fire on another Russian howitzer, which was firing directly from the building. Despite the protection of the enemy, the correct setting of the fire ensured that the cannon was disabled after the hit. In addition, the gunners managed to destroy an enemy tank with a direct hit by adjusting the fire with the help of an unmanned aerial vehicle. After that, the Russian army was completely cornered, and he also faced a major failure in his important struggle against Ukraine. While it has been found that the Ukrainian army has made numerous gains against the Russian army since the beginning of the war, however, a number of very serious problems for the Russian army are expected to manifest themselves in the near future. If it continues in this way, Ukraine is expected to completely corner Russia on the battlefield and achieve the victory it wants, launching a peace negotiations process that is completely advantageous to Russia. If this kind of structuring brings with it new advantages to be gained against the Russian army in the future, it is expected that the tense atmosphere of the regional political climate will soften a little more, and the parties will change everything by agreeing on the basis of negotiations. The main element that is expected is that the possibility that the Russian army, which will face quite big difficulties in the face of such an attitude, will be cornered against Ukraine, will emerge more heavily than ever. Ukraine had closed the year 2024 in a superior way. Since the first days of the new year, it continues to conduct simultaneous crushing operations in the Kursk region and the occupied territories in Ukraine. Although Putin is planning attacks in order to prevent the territories he has occupied in Ukraine from going away with his weakening army strength, they cannot cross the defense line of the Ukrainian army. Putin has started to organize more attacks since President Trump took office. The reason is that President Trump will definitely bring the two countries to the reconciliation table, and Putin wants not to give back the territories he has in order to be able to agree on his own terms. The Ukrainian army is also continuing its overwhelming operations in the Kursk region, to regain sovereignty on its own terms in the event of a possible reconciliation. Putin, who launched the war of occupation of Ukraine in February 2022, thought that he would win this war easily. All their explanations were that they were going to win this war without any losses. Today, Putin realized that he was completely wrong about this. From the first days of the war, carrying out all kinds of attacks contrary to the rules of war, applying his expertise in sabotage and espionage in combat, could not prevent Putin's current weakness in combat. Putin is known to have twice sabotaged underwater communication cables in the Baltic Sea months ago. Putin has made such secret damaging moves in every process of the war. The whole world knows Putin's mission before he became president of Russia. For this reason, the intelligence services of many countries, especially the United States, have been investigating Putin's agents since the beginning of the war, and Putin's agents have been captured in many countries during the war. Last year, agents working for Putin in exchange for Ukrainian money were arrested in Ukraine. The information obtained by these agents in the investigations carried out at the place where they were staying was captured without being transmitted to Russia. After receiving the statements of these people, all their assets were confiscated and they were referred to the court for treason. Ukrainian intelligence agencies are constantly continuing their vigilant investigations about Putin's agents. As a result of these investigations, they successfully solved another agent case. The agent, who was used to Putin in the Ukrainian high-level security unit, was captured by Ukrainian intelligence before he could carry out his activities. When Putin realized that he could not win the war, he began to carry out many more illegal attempts. Putin has the logic that he should use every forbidden way to win. The Russian army had captured the most important regions in Ukraine during the beginning period of the war, when it was one of the most powerful armies in the world. These regions are border regions on the four sides of Ukraine. Putin thought that he would invade Ukraine in a short time and capture Kiev from all sides, and quickly seized 4 regions of Ukraine in the first months of the war. The Ukrainian army was inadequate even in defense, which was quite weak as a combat capability. For this reason, Putin announced that this invasion would end in a short time without any casualties. From the first quarter of the war, the United States and Western countries began to support Ukraine due to Putin's expansionist war strategy. These supports include combat equipment, latest system, missiles, air defense systems, armored vehicles, ammunition, humanitarian aid, and military training. When the Ukrainian army soldiers added systematic research studies within the army to the combat equipment that supported the combat training they received, they began to gain superiority over the Russian army in defense and attack. The biggest proof of these developments of the Ukrainian army is their entry into the Kursk region on August 6th. Putin's claim that the war will not be felt on Russian soil has lost its validity today. As a result of systematic work of Ukrainian troops with Ukrainian intelligence, an area of 1,700 kilometers in the Kursk region was occupied in the first weeks. At the time of this invasion, Putin was continuing his inhumane attacks in Ukraine. The fact that he was quite late in intervening in the Kursk region was a situation in which war analysts could not make sense. War analysts who think that the Kursk region should be defended very well because of its importance to Russia comment that Putin's ambition to take Kiev created an idea that he allowed the Kursk region to be occupied, and today he is paying the price for this insensitivity very heavily. Yes, the Kursk region is a very important region for Russia as an oil and gas infrastructure. Both commercial returns and meeting the needs of the Russian army are provided from these energy infrastructures. These energy infrastructures have been the targets of the Ukrainian army for 2 months. The Ukrainian army, which conducts operations in all kinds of military areas, bases, energy infrastructure, ammunition depots that will ensure the decline of the Russian army, achieves all its goals respectively. A possible compromise is quite powerful trumps in the hands of Ukraine. It is an issue that the whole world is wondering about, and the most important issue is which country will accept the other's terms in a possible compromise. For today, the two countries are in a position not to accept each other's terms. In particular, Ukraine has begun to repel Russian troops from its territory, despite the destruction it has experienced. He caused great damage to the Russian economy with his effective attacks in the Kursk region. The Ukrainian leader in many statements is that it is impossible to accept Putin's terms. Accepting Putin's terms also means that Europe will be in great danger. He added that Putin's complete termination of the expansionist strategy was possible with the victory of Ukraine. After Trump's election as president, European countries began to experience great concern about Putin. It was thought that the prospect of cutting off support to Ukraine would cause Putin to become more emboldened, as President Trump argued that this war was unnecessary. Trump was arguing that the support to Ukraine before the elections was extremely unnecessary. With the end of the presidential elections and Trump's swearing in on January 20th, he has officially begun his term as President of the United States. Since the first day he took office, Trump has been making statements about the need for this war to end as soon as possible. The last statement was for Putin. It is the fact that Putin, who persists in fighting despite the bad course of his army and country, must end this war as soon as possible, otherwise heavy sanctions will be applied. The Russian economy received its first blow at the beginning of the war when the country started to impose an embargo. The limited budget allocation with the idea that the war will last a short time, and the fact that the war will last for a very long time, is the second major blow for the Russian economy. The general strategy of the Ukrainian troops is to destroy Russian ammunition and equipment in the attacks. This strategy of Ukraine, on the other hand, has caused major earthquakes in both the Russian army and the Russian economy. The fact that Ukrainian troops have targeted Russian energy structures has accelerated the collapse of the Russian economy. At this point, Trump's threat is that if Putin does not end the war, they will start imposing heavy trade sanctions. Putin is now completely cornered. Even if hundreds of agents are working, it does not seem possible for Putin to get out of this desperate situation. The comments of war analysts are that from this point on, this war will end with Putin giving up.